Like you're like the last Japanese soldier on Okinawa. You think the war's still going.
And in the past, you've talked about great replacement theory.
I must say, one of the reasons people don't like people like you in the media is that you never say exactly what you mean.
This is the same theory that has inspired the New York Buffalo shooting where 11 black Americans were killed.
Come on. How do they get people this stupid in the media? I guess it doesn't pay well. How dare you try to tie me to some lunatic who murdered people?
So therefore you support gun control?
What?
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we are going to watch Tucker Carlson absolutely scold a few Australian journalists. And now this one hits close to home for me because firstly, and you can check this out in your own time, but Tucker spends much of the speech talking about how much he loves Australia and how great it is and how everybody should visit there, which you should because Australia is an incredible country. But secondly, because I have such a contempt for the Australian media, more so actually than any other media in the world, I would put North Korea's media above Australian media. And unfortunately, and I'm going to get into this more during the video, but our population is very susceptible to propaganda. And time again, they eat it up without a second thought. And I mean, a lot of these journalists, the type of which you're about to see, which perfectly represent them, will literally just mindlessly parrot whatever the mainstream narrative is. And then anybody who decides to go against it, or anybody who decides to be skeptical, they will happily just pour scorn on them and defame them. And this was seen perfectly during COVID, when the police used riot squads and dogs and other violent means to violently subdue anti-vaxxers or peaceful protesters.
Those who managed to make it into the city, past blocked roads and checkpoints, were met by 1,400 officers who didn't hesitate to cuff the rule breakers
that were trying to take a stand against their country turning into a tyranny.
With not a face mask in sight, it's feared these protests are spreading Delta as well as misinformation.
So there are exceptions, but if you had to create an avatar of an NPC, a non-playable character, it would look like a low-tier Australian journalist who works for ABC or SBS or Fairfax Media or worst of all, heaven forbid, The Project.
How do audiences react to your shows?
They love it.
Yeah?
They love it. They revel in it. I've got queer kids bringing their family to my show.
So with all that off my chest, rather therapeutic actually, I might say, let's have a look at Tucker's back and forths with the NPCs.
You've preempted my question on Putin.
Putin! Putin!
I think you did strategically because you knew it's what we'd ask.
Putin! He's so bad.
And I also appreciate that.
Did he make you take the COVID shot? Take the what? The COVID shot? No, he didn't. Sorry.
The COVID shot saved probably tens of millions.
Oh, yeah, and definitely. Safe and effective. This is why everyone loves the media.
Probably 100 times more lives than Putin has killed in Ukraine.
It's like a time capsule. It's like you're like the last Japanese soldier on Okinawa. You think the war's still going. Oh, it's hilarious. Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm being boorish.
Can I get the full answer in without interruption?
Okay, I beg your pardon.
I'm interested in your position on Putin. Many people in this crowd would adore conservative prime ministers in this country like John Howard, Tony Abbott, mainstream right-wingers like Boris Johnson, Australian Liberals, some of their MPs are in the crowd, are vehemently anti-Putin. They believe he's a reprehensible figure who doesn't believe in the values of conservatism, such as the rule of law and democracy, which gives us the freedoms we have in our countries. I'm interested, do you feel any level of shame or regret that you were termed a useful idiot, and then post your interview, Vladimir Putin himself said in his Russian media that he was surprised at how weak your questions were, and he also said that you were wrong when you said that no other journalist had asked to interview him. He said, that's not true. We only thought Tucker was the only person to report fairly.
Wait, I thought that you were describing Putin as a psychopathic liar, and yet now you're taking his word for things?
Do you?
I mean, but let me just quickly unpack your absurd soliloquy if I can. First, I'm stuck on the idea that Boris Johnson is a right-winger. Do you know Boris Johnson? I do. Boris Johnson is a criminal buffoon who, like so many who claim to love Ukraine, is single-handedly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men in this war that Ukraine cannot win. And I would refer you to Wikipedia. How many more people does Russia have than Ukraine? Do you know? 100 million. 100 million. And in a land war, that's a relevant number. It is not possible for Ukraine to beat Russia. The best they can do is sue for peace. That's been known, including by Zelensky, who wanted that since the early days of this conflict. And Boris Johnson, on orders from the Biden administration, shut down, and this is not a disputed fact, this is a fact, admitted by everybody now, shut down the peace negotiations almost 2 years ago. And Ukraine has been completely destroyed. And now Zelensky has passed a law allowing foreign corporations to own land there. So you tell me what Ukraine is going to look like in 30 years when all of it is owned by BlackRock and multinational corporations and its population is not Ukrainian, okay? So the tragedy of what's happened in Ukraine, orchestrated by the Western powers, including your government, and I hope you do, and driven by my government, I feel shame about it, I hope you do too, is really one of the great crimes of my lifetime. So the idea that somehow if you're against that, you're for Putin, well, of course, that's absurd. And by the way, speaking of your friend Boris Johnson, he attacked me, of course, ad hominem, and so I called him. He was a journalist, not surprisingly, a man of low character, not shocking. And so I called him and I said, well, you've called me all these names. Why don't you sit down for a conversation? I happen to be in your rainy, depressing slum, London, and we could have a conversation. And he said, I won't do that unless you pay me $1 million. That's a fact. That's a non-disputed fact. I have the text messages. So if that is the credible source of the slur that, look, if I were a toady of Putin or I loved Putin, I would just say so. Because why do I care? I've already been fired. I don't work for anybody. I have no incentive. And by the way, it's perfectly fine if people love Putin. Well, I don't understand what that has to do with anything. We are citizens of different countries. We should judge first and foremost our own leaders. How's our country doing? How are my children doing? What's their future look like?
The last Japanese soldier in Okinawa. That was hilarious and the perfect description of that journalist's take on the vax. And trust me, guys, it only gets worse from here, but this is why I adore this situation so much. Those of you who haven't been to Australia won't really be able to properly understand this, but if you live there and then you've gone overseas, you'll realize that it's a rather insular culture and population. They're definitely not stupid. I would say, in fact, Australians are some of the most productive people in the world. You just look at the burgeoning industries like construction and mining, etc. And also, Australians have a very good reputation around the world for being really hard workers. And if anyone watching this has ever hired Australians, you might have had a similar experience. Not such a good reputation when it comes to their antics when traveling in groups, but hey.
You gonna do those helmets up? Oi, brother! How are you? Hey, mate, are you right to drive? Oh, no. What are you doing driving the bike? I'm blind.
Anyways, when it comes to nuanced conversation and dialogue and debate and having a healthy skepticism and criticism of government and media,
you can die from the corona or get really sick.
You can pass away from this corona, or you can get really sick one.
It's probably one of the worst examples I've ever seen. Well, I mean, with that one, they would probably edge out North Korea. But this is why Australians were so easily ushered into this mass formation psychosis, where they wanted to literally lynch the vax skeptical people, and they actually built camps for them that the population, or much of the population anyway, was celebrating the idea of these anti-vaxxers going into camps.
A long-awaited review of Queensland's Wellcamp quarantine facility will be handed down by the state's Auditor-General today. The 1,000-bed facility outside Toowoomba was built at a cost of $237 million.
And now here's an out-of-context clip of our Prime Minister dancing at a Taylor Swift concert. If that doesn't tell you everything about who is in charge in our country, then I don't know what else to say. Now, this sense of apathy on part of the Australian population, in my opinion, is born of an overconfidence in the government and institutions. And this is actually not a bad thing necessarily. It's because life is so good in Australia. I mean, the cost of living is going up, but people make good money in Australia. The 2008 GFC didn't really affect us that badly. We don't yet have the demographic problems that we're seeing in Europe and UK and America, but if we keep going the way we are, then we will have that. We haven't really had a major war on home soil for our freedom, so we don't have that sort of visceral freedom fighting feeling in our blood. And it's for this reason that Australians are pretty apathetic. And it's for this reason that our institutions, educational institutions and more, were so easily captured by the Marxist left during the long march through the institutions. And I did a whole episode on this actually with Dr. Stephen Shavura on the Reality Based podcast. And I'll leave that in the end screen at the end of this video. So now circling back to why I love this video so much, it's because we see Tucker Carlson, one of the most elite journalists in the world, somebody who understands how the world works, who gets boots on the ground in different locations and actually does hard-hitting journalism. Seeing him get challenged by these armchair, blog-writing, foodie journalists is just hilarious. Journalists that on any other day would probably be writing articles about how Donald Trump and Andrew Tate are responsible for the rise of toxic masculinity in Australia. And so to see Tucker just swatting them like pesky, annoying little mosquitoes is truly, truly satisfying. And now on to the next part where Tucker pours more scorn on the Australian media and discusses Julian Assange's recent release. And then an ABC journalist tries to say that Julian Assange is actually a danger, and Tucker Carlson just comes out with the most red pill, anti-establishment truth bombs, which I know would just make Australian journalists totally malfunction because these opinions just aren't allowed down under. So with that, let's get into it.
None of that has anything to do with Putin, except to the extent that you all, this country, sit back, your government allows the Biden administration to push us into nuclear war, which is where we are right now, right on the cusp of it. And somehow that's not a story. The idea is that Putin doesn't respect human rights or the rule of law. Okay, well, just today, Julian Assange was released after 12 years in custody, and your government did nothing. The UK made it possible, and the United States demanded it. You tell me how that's consistent with the rule of law or democracy. It's not. It's ruled by the intel agencies. It's lawlessness, and it's a crime. So I'm not saying that we're morally equivalent to Putin. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is our concern should be first and foremost, how are our countries run? And we give our own leaders a pass time and time again because they point to some other creep on the world stage and say, he's bad. Kim Jong-un is bad. Well, yeah, of course he's bad. That's why I don't live in North Korea. That's why I don't live in Russia. I have no interest in living in Russia. But the point is, you're bad too. And the fact that he's bad does not allow you to continue being bad. What? And the last thing I will say that I really feel deeply and I really resent on an emotional level, and you'll pardon my passion, I don't know you, I'm sure we'd be very close friends if we did know each other. But I really resent what I have seen across the West in the past 15 years, and it's a sea change from my youth when my father was a reporter. This alignment between media organizations and the government, I find disgusting, actually. I think it's a perfect inversion of what you're supposed to do. If you're a journalist, your job is to challenge power on behalf of the powerless. It is not to align with the powerful against the powerless. And that is precisely what you have done. I watched your ABC this morning in my hotel room for about 20 minutes until I looked around for a vomit bag. And I watched, it was one of the most grotesque, I couldn't even believe it was real. The first story, this is unbelievable. The first story was Assange, God bless them. That is the biggest story. The second story was a family of 4 found dead in a house. I think in a suburb of Sydney, but it may have been Melbourne, I beg your pardon. But 4 Australians found dead of what they suspected was a drug OD. Apparently they've been taking a new synthetic opioid that has emerged in Australia and is killing people. Now, this is a huge problem where I live, much bigger than here, but I'm familiar with it. And the reporter said it's probably the synthetic opioid and it's been seen and they're dead. On to the next story. The next story was the Australian government's new law that will require a prescription to buy nicotine products. And we were treated to a 15-minute lecture on ABC, whatever the hell that is, about how nicotine is dangerous and we need to keep it out of the hands of Australians. And I'm like, wait a second. Nicotine, first of all, is not dangerous. That's not true. That's factually incorrect. You know nothing about the science, A. B, compared to what? Compared to what? Oh, we have this new synthetic opioid that's killing people. The government, not too concerned. What they're really concerned about is that people might be using nicotine, which, by the way, has the byproduct of raising testosterone levels and making people a little harder to command. That's a massive threat! So this is the point where the media gets involved and says, wait a second, let's chart the death toll from vaping versus fentanyl. Maybe one's a little worse than the other. And what exactly are you doing about it? Why don't you press your ministers and your prime minister, like, what are you doing about it, about drug use? And the answer is nothing. Instead, they're hassling people adults who want to use nicotine, which I would highly recommend to every person in this room as a life-enhancing, God-given chemical. That's just my view. But I'm like, a media should be like holding these people to the fire on that. I was fired over a year ago, so I don't have to like worry about this or be defensive about it because I like don't have a job. So there is a certain freedom in unemployment. And so I sympathize with you guys who work for these companies that are like truly corrupt and you sort of know that, but you don't want to deal with it because you've got kids and a mortgage. I get it. I've been there. But let's just be honest. Everybody else knows what it is. Everyone else knows how corrupt you are. And so there's a reason they have contempt for you. I'm just saying.
Guys, if you have not liked this video and if you would like to see this go far and wide, Tucker giving these journalists a little spank that they deserve, then please don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying it here. Back to it.
On that note, I might pass you over to Andrew Green from the ABC.
Oh, I love it. You gonna take my nicotine? It's dangerous.
Good afternoon, Tucker.
A prescription for nicotine. Okay.
I missed that segment this morning.
It's shocking. You should watch it. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen on television.
I do want to ask about a country you haven't mentioned today, and that's China. You may or may not be aware of a strategic partnership Australia is involved with your country and the United Kingdom called AUKUS, where we will get nuclear-powered submarines. Can I get your assessment of that? And it was largely in response to China. Do you think China poses a threat here?
I think that, you know, first of all, I think it's very complicated, but I think the overview is this. China has 1.4 billion people and not enough resources or land. Australia has 26 million people and a sparsely populated continent that is brimming, overflowing with resources that countries with expanding economies need. And I don't know how expensive your politicians are. I'm guessing not very. So I don't think it would be too much of a lift for China to just buy them all, and I assume they already are doing that. I mean, obviously they are doing that, and they're doing that in my country too. They bought the current president's son. So I'm not mad at China for that. Well, they did. They bought Hunter Biden. I mean, that's the whole story. And it's proven, okay? So I'm not mad at China about that, just for the record. I'm not particularly anti-China. I don't want to live in China. It's not my system at all, and I find a lot of parts of the culture repugnant. On the other hand, I see China, a country acting in its own interest. So I'm not mad about that. I'm mad about the countries like my own and possibly yours that allow themselves to be taken advantage of. That's the truly shameful thing. So I don't hate, again, I just don't hate China. You know, I see a rapidly growing country that will do whatever it can to help itself. And if it crushes people in the way, it will. Okay. So that's pretty reasonable. That's kind of a, you know, time-tested model. Your job is not to be crushed. And so I'd be very, very, very concerned about it. I don't think you face an imminent invasion or anything. I do think that the concerns about China, just the size differential, the resource question, population, these are the fears that have pushed generations of Australian governments into a counterproductive alliance with the United States and Great Britain. I think the view here is that the U.S. will rescue us if we ever really have a problem. And I don't think that's true. I'm sorry to say that. And I'm just saying that as, I just don't think it's true. And I think you're unwise for believing it's true. And I think a lot of people on Taiwan thought that was true. It turns out not to be true. I think a lot of Pashtuns in Afghanistan thought that was true. A lot of Montagnards in Vietnam thought that was true. You know, a lot of Christian Iraqis thought that was true, and all of them learned the hard way that it's not true. that in the end, countries act in their own interest. And in a democratic system, leadership changes every 4 or 8 years with different views, expressing, evolved opinions from the public. So no democratic country can be longitudinally reliable as a partner simply because its government changes so often. That's just a fact. It's not an attack. I'm not attacking the United States. I'm not attacking you. I'm just saying, if you think that allowing the U.S. government to stage, foreign troops on your soil, they didn't beat you in a war, did they? Then why do they have foreign troops here? I'm sorry. I know I'm offending everybody. It's just a fact. And I don't know if that's like a huge part of your economy, but like rule one in my country is we don't have foreign troops on our soil because we're a sovereign country. And I don't understand why all these countries allow it. I love the United States. I'm glad, that we've got the whip hand, I guess. But I don't think any country should put up with that. Now, you can't have soldiers in my country. Go away. You know what I mean? Like, we can be friends, but having troops on my soil suggests not a friendship, but a master-slave relationship. And I'm just not into it at all. And I don't think you should be into it either.
Nailed it. It is very disturbing to see the alignment that is happening between government and media. And they should definitely not be working in lockstep to peddle a certain narrative. Once again, in Australia, during the pandemic, this was the perfect example. They were working hand in hand. The media was demonizing the anti-vaxxers or the skeptical-based, smart, intelligent people, whilst the government was setting their riot police on them. And another good example of this that Tucker mentioned is when it comes to Russia and China, is some of the worst, most egregious forms of propaganda. I guarantee you that if you just went into an Australian main road somewhere and you interviewed 50 people and asked them what they think about Russia and China, most of them would think that they are these brutal, terrible dictatorships that just want to kill us all. And that is complete bullshit. I certainly would not want to live in China. I would not want to have to deal with people pushing in line all day, because we know what the Chinese are like when it comes to a line. I certainly would not be eating from any wet markets. Dog for me, friend, not food. And I wouldn't want to be around people all the time who, when they cross the road, they sprint like they're about to get taken out when really there's a car about a kilometre away.
Clara, tell me what you see. Beef and broccoli. Two guys who look completely different. 7.
But anyways, despite all those very true factors, it's still propaganda. And if we don't wake up to this propaganda, then they are going to continue to lubricate us for the coming conflict with China and Russia. One that will spell out conscription for people like myself and dollar signs for the establishment, bloodthirsty war hawks who are behind this and who also would love to see Julian Assange 6 feet under. And now on to the last part, which is easily the best part, where Tucker just treats this journalist with the same amount of just contempt and just ridicule that I feel for them.
Hi, Tucker. Thank you so much for your address today. So you talked a little bit about immigration, and in the past you've talked about how white Australians, Americans, Europeans are being replaced by non-white immigrants in what is often referred to as the Great Replacement Theory. This is the same...
Have I said that whites are being replaced?
Well...
I don't think I said that.
Well, it's been mentioned on your show 4,000 times. And
really, when did I say that?
On your show.
I said whites are being replaced?
You have said that before.
Really?
Yeah.
I would challenge you to cite that, because I'm pretty sure I haven't said that. I said native-born Americans are being replaced, including blacks.
Native-born Americans.
Native-born Americans. And Americans black Americans have been, African Americans have been in the United States for, in many cases, their families over 400 years. And their concerns are every bit as real and valid and alive to me as the concerns of white people whose families have been there 400 years. So I've never said that whites are being replaced. Not one time. And you can't cite it.
Untrue.
So we just met, but when our relationship starts with a lie, it makes it tough to be friends. So
you've been lying
let's
about
pull
my
that back. I'm happy to explain what I do think.
So.
Well, you actually can't say it because I didn't say it, and I don't believe it. And I'm telling you that to your face, so why don't you just accept me at face value? My concern is that the people who are born in the country are the main responsibility of its leaders. And as noted earlier, when those leaders shift their concern from the people whose responsibility it is to take care of to people around the world, to put their priorities above that of their own citizens, that's immoral. And they are being replaced in my country, people who are born in the United States. And the birth rate tells the whole story. They're not at replacement rate. And so the US population is growing because we're importing people from other countries. And my view is that happy people have children, and a functioning economy allows them to do that. And we don't have that. And so you need to fix the economy and fix the culture and make it so that people who want to have kids can. You don't just go for the quick sugar fix of importing new people. Like, that's my position. And if you think that's racist, that's your problem.
I never called you a racist.
But of course you are suggesting, and
Well,
I must say, one of the reasons people don't like people like you in the media is that you never say exactly what you mean. Your slurs are all by implication, and you're about to tell me the Great Replacement Theory is racist or anti-Semitic, whatever. I've said what I've said to you right now like 100 times in public. I hope to, if I live long enough, say it 100 more times. I think it's completely honest and real, not racist or scary. It's factually true. It's not a theory, it's a fact. And the whole point of your question was to be like, you're a scary racist.
Well, I haven't
And my
actually finished my
response is, no,
question.
I'm not. Okay, well, how about no more lying in your questions, and then I'll answer it.
Okay, well, this is the same theory, or as you say, idea, that has inspired the New York Buffalo shooting where 11 black Americans were killed.
On.
2
You know what
white
I mean?
Americans were killed.
Like,
It's also
okay,
inspired...
it's not, first of all...
It's inspired one of the worst Australian guns
How do
of
they
all
get
time
people
to
this
shoot
stupid in the media? I guess it doesn't pay well. Look, I'm sorry. I've lived among people like you for too long, and I don't mean to call you stupid. Maybe you're just pretending to be, but I'm totally against violence. I'm totally against the war in Ukraine, for example, which doubtless you support. And like all dutiful liberals, support more carnage. I don't. I hate mass shootings, actually. Nothing I said, what does it mean to inspire something? My views are not bigoted against any group. They're honest, they're factual. That's not hate, that's reality. And my views derive from my deep concern for Americans, actually. Americans aren't having kids because they can't afford to. And nobody in charge cares. And so that's my position. That doesn't inspire mass shootings. How dare you try to tie me to some lunatic who murdered people? How dare you, actually? And in fact, I mean, do you know what I mean? I'd be like, Hitler wore those shoes. A lot of people are saying that you're like Hitler. Can you explain those shoes? Hitler wore exactly the same shoes, and you're like, I got nothing to do with Hitler. Well, that's how I feel about your absurd, disingenuous question.
Right, so therefore you support gun control?
What? I thought it couldn't get dumber, but it did. No, I don't support disarming law-abiding people so they can't defend themselves, so the government has a monopoly on violence? I don't think so. First of all, in my country, that's illegal, as you know. But moreover, it should be illegal in every country. A sovereign person has the right to defend himself and his family. Period. And that said, I'm totally opposed to harming anyone. Are you concerned about the war in Ukraine? And the countless innocents being murdered there every single day? I doubt you are. Probably Putin bad. I am. I'm a Christian. I hate violence. I hate mass shootings. I have guns at home, and often on my person when I'm in the United States, I'm proud to say, because I want to defend myself and those I love against violence. That's the point. I'm not perpetrating crimes. I'm not shooting strangers. I'm defending what I love. And if you're against that, I guess I would ask why. Why would you be against that?
Well, so you don't think you harbor any kind of responsibility for these hate crimes?
I'm sorry. I'm trying to be charitable. I was like, maybe you're just pretending to be dumb. Now I don't think it's an act.
Tucker, thank you for taking those questions. I'm sure you enjoyed some
Actually, I
questions from the
loved it. I
press.
just feel sorry. I mean, because I got here and the country's so unbelievably beautiful and the people are so cheerful and funny and cool and smart. I'm like, your media's got to be better than ours. It can't just be a bunch of castrated robots reading questions from the boss. And then it turns out it's exactly the same, maybe even a tiny bit dumber.
Castrated robots reading questions from the boss. The perfect explanation. And I mean, let me just say this on behalf of my Australian brethren out there. For anybody who's watching this, wherever in the world you are, there are a lot of intelligent, based Australians out there who don't just swallow the mainstream media propaganda like it is a prawn. Prawn, not shrimp. Prawn. Anyway, I think the pandemic was a time that really woke a lot of Australians up. And a lot of you may not know this, but during that time, before Rattlesnake TV was even a thought, I was involved in a lot of activism against mandates and against lockdowns, etc. in Australia. And there were anti-establishment rallies where there were thousands upon thousands of people driving from all around the country to the capital in Canberra to protest. There were also marches through the streets in all major Australian cities to the tune of hundreds and thousands of people marching for their freedom. It was one of the most beautiful and unifying experiences I've ever seen. And Australia does have a very rich culture and identity. And just on that, I was at a funeral a few years ago of a Vietnam War veteran named Frank Benfield. Rest in peace, Frank. And all of his friends that he served with were there, and it was a really amazing feeling, and it was a really amazing service because they were playing all of the Australian songs, the band played Waltzing Matilda, etc.
God help me, I was only 19.
And my brothers and I left that funeral thinking, wow, like Australian culture has really been lost on the modern generation. These older guys have a true understanding of what it means to be an Aussie and have a true understanding of the notion of mateship and serving your country and loyalty and being humble and dutiful and all of the rest. So it's not all bad, and there is still a spark there, although our media apparatus is as contemptible as they seem in this video. But hopefully that changes too, and if there are any young Aussies watching this video who are thinking about getting into media, do it independently. Not only because it's much more interesting and rewarding and comes with a lot more freedom, but also because the mainstream media in Australia is truly dying. And in America, you can see the rise in alternative media and all of these voices out there who are doing quite well. And to be honest, that market is reasonably saturated now. But in Australia, it's yours for the taking. If you're a pretty intelligent young person and you're well read and researched and you want to talk about Australian politics, man, you have not got much competition. There's a few good ones doing it. Joel Jamal, Friendly Geordies is another one who has a good YouTube channel. And I'm sure there are a few others, but there is a big gap in the market. So with that, enough rambling from me today. If you guys would like to find my links below as per usual, if you'd like to subscribe to the channel, if you're enjoying it here, right here. And also, if you would like to watch another video right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.